As we were singing that song, I thought back to what we talked about in January, where God, when he tells Moses, I am, really it is, I exist because I exist. God is existence itself. And scripture says that nothing exists outside of his sustaining it. And so what that means is that God is sustaining and holding each one of us in process and as we're going through our lives. And God has lent of his existence to each one of us. And so while Tim and Casey are enjoying vacation, he finds joy with them. And also when he lends of his existence into Julie, while she's suffering, God suffers with her. So God's there right in the middle of it all. And we've seen, as we've gone through the story, the reckless love, it's not this idea that God's reckless in a stupid kind of way. There's many things I could do as a kid, and my mom would say, why are you reckless? And he essentially means you're stupid. God's reckless in that his reckless love, he's willing to love people through the hurt. And we've looked at this story through scripture, and his love has stuck through history with humanity. And it's sticking through with Julie as God has to experience suffering because he's giving her existence. And so his existence suffers as well. We're closing our journey today. This is the last sermon of the series, and we're turning towards the Christian hope. We're turning towards what we think we're looking for. We're going to go into the book of Revelation. It's a scary book. It's a book that all kinds of people have different pictures of how things are going to go, where the world's going to end. And what's common with all those pictures, though, is that God sets everything right. Before we go into the book of Revelation, I kind of want to recap our journey once more. I tend to recap a lot. And it's because the more we think on these things, the more we get it into our minds, the more we'll remember it when we need to. And so in Genesis, we saw that humanity was considered the pinnacle of creation. In the book of Exodus, Moses and God were having an exchange. And God says, Moses, your people are messing up. And we saw that Moses talked right back to God and say, no, don't put this on me. Your people are messing up. You saved them. It's your people. And we kind of had this moment where okay, is the lightning going to strike? Do you talk back to God like that? And God says, you're right, Moses. And what we see with this is that God is okay with us being real with him, with us engaging with God. Moses was able to engage right back with God, and God worked with him. Then we jump to 2 Samuel, where God promised he would see everything through. He said, I will make this happen. We went into the Psalms and we saw the range of human emotion and experience. In Psalm 22, we saw the joy that the psalmist had experienced worshiping God in Jerusalem. In Psalm 88, the darkest psalm of all, we saw the psalmist who could see no light. He's like, the world's so dark. Back to Psalm 22, we then saw that the psalmist who was happy praising God in Jerusalem, later in the psalm, he's like, but now I can't feel the joy. And he basically says, God, where are you? And he also says, and what's wrong with me? Because I know I've had the joy. So he had the light that he's looking for, though. So we had the range of joy with God, of darkness, where you can't even find the light and you can't find hope. And in the middle, where you have hope, but you're not quite as happy as you used to be. And so we saw the range of these emotions, but it exemplified the lesson of Moses. God's okay with us engaging with him. He's okay if we speak out to God and say, I don't even see you anymore. I don't see light in this at all. And we saw that's okay. God's okay with you telling him how you feel. From the struggle of Moses and humanity, we went to the promise of God to see things through. From the struggle of Psalms, we went to the promise of Isaiah that there would be good news coming. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's such good news. We talked about how in the ancient days, these people had sandals. Their feet would get dusty. And you have a messenger who's running down from the mountains. You're going to have some muddy, nasty, stinky feet. But Isaiah says the news is so good. Those feet are beautiful. So when you see the ancient imagery, it's amazing. The message is so good. These muddy feet are going to be beautiful. And we transition to the New Testament. In the New Testament, the good news arrives. Jesus ushered in this new humanity, and he defeated death, and he brought the new age forward to us, where we still exist in this old age. And we're invited to join this new humanity. We're invited into this. And as we enter into that divine sandwich that I spoke of, on top of divine blessings, under the divine presence, we're invited to the mercy seat to usher in and carry the presence of God. So that's where we've come, this invitation to carry the presence of God. God has seen us through humanity. He's seen us through history. He understands our humanity and wants to engage. And so here we end with a vision of what's to come. Passage today is Revelation 21, verses 1 through 5. And I'll read it for us. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and earth had ceased to exist, and the sea existed no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, made ready like a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, the residence of God is among human beings. He will live among them, and they will be his people, and God will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will not exist anymore, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the former things have ceased to exist." And the one seated on the throne said, "Look, I am making all things new." And he said to me, "Write it down, because these words are reliable and true." Here's the end we look for. This is where it all comes together. It's the grand story of history reaching its incredible climax. It's a revealing climax in the details that stand out. What's interesting is that God's purpose has never been, according to this, to pull humans out of here and get us to heaven. But God's plan is for heaven to come to earth. We read in this series, and we just recapped about how God has refused to give up on humanity. He will see things through. And here we find that just as God made humans new as they passed from life into death, he's going to do the same to the earth. All the things of the old age, just as they fall off of us when we pass through death and into new life. All those old things, the former things, it says, they're going to go away. He's not giving up on any of it. So some might be disappointed. We're not floating up to a cloud. We're not playing a harp. That's not the goal of this. Heaven's going to come to earth. From the beginning of the narrative, we've seen that God's intent has been a heaven-earth place with humans right at the heart of it. In Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, he created a place where he could dwell with humanity. In the Exodus, it wasn't just about getting God's people out of Egypt, but getting his people out so God could dwell with them. And in the dynasty of David, it wasn't just about a great king who was powerful and made a great nation and it looked great to God. It's about making a nation where, again, God could dwell with his people. This has been the plan all along. And in the coming of Christ, it wasn't just about God presenting himself to invite us up here to heaven out of all of this, but it was about leading to this culminating time where God is going to come and dwell with us on earth and exist with us, humanity. It's interesting that at this culminating time, we read there's going to be no more tears. It's of interest here is it actually doesn't say that. We aren't wiped clean to be made into these robotic humans who no longer have emotions. We don't become godly Spocks. We're not think of Spock from Star Trek. He couldn't feel emotion, and it bewildered him. It doesn't say there's no more tears because you become like Spock and you just become these robotic people. Rather, it says there's a work of God to wipe away the tears. Wiping away tears means that there were tears. There was something to cry about. And it's as if this time of meeting God, a counseling work takes place. This resonates with the experience of God that brought me to faith when I was 31. When God spoke to me, there was a love and a peace that came into me. And it resolved everything I'd gone through. I didn't find in God's love and peace. I didn't find that it wiped away my experience. But it made it okay. So God is this counselor, God. What do we go to counseling for? We go to counseling to try to resolve everything we've gone through, all our struggles, to find the love and the joy and the peace that we know we should have. And what this shows is, as God wipes away the tears, I believe it's a counseling work that takes place. We don't become animatrons and we don't forget all the painful stuff. Rather, there's a resolution brought to it, as God as a perfect counselor can, and what we struggle to do in our own counseling offices. With God, it was like an accelerated counseling session, and I zoomed to where I want to be in life. Perfect love and peace. And I experienced it for a moment. I was in tune with love and peace for that time. So then what happened to me? Why do I have trouble driving down 217? I was in tune with that love and peace. What's interesting is that after that moment with God, when I got a taste of that, I went back to a world full of death. The death of dreams, the death of hope, the deaths I cause myself every day. And here's the key difference that we look for in the new age. The difference in this passage is there's no more death. So God's love and peace can come into us, and we don't go back into a world that then takes us out of it. And there's a permanent resolution, because death doesn't exist to pull us down anymore. So the question we come to is, how does death not exist? We talked last week about God setting things right in the new age. In this passage, it's envisioned as there being no more sea. I don't know how many people love the beach. What are you going to do with no more beaches in heaven? No more ocean, no more carnival cruises. What's interesting is that visions, they have symbolic meaning. These things that are seen aren't literal. So you probably have a beach on the new earth. But the symbols are meant to describe something, to tell you a dynamic that's going to happen. In this case, in the ancient world, and for the Jews specifically, the sea was a symbol of chaos. There was no controlling it. There were monsters that existed within it. And upon the sea, you were literally tossed around physically in the same manner that chaos tosses you around in life. We looked back at the Gospel of John when Jesus walked on the water. The sign that we saw was the lesson was that God is above the chaos. The chaos does not throw him around. And as he quiets the sea, it shows that God has control over it. And so the meaning for John here, and the meaning for an ancient reader of this, would be that not that there's no more beautiful beaches, not that there's no more carnival cruises, but having a vision of no more sea means there's no more chaos. Without chaos, there can't be death. Death is the culmination of chaos. Chaos is the brokenness of a pattern. And death comes because your cells go chaotic and create cancer. Death comes because the wiring that sends signals to your heart become chaotic and death comes. And so what we see here is there's no more chaos. And so there can be no more death. As one who spent a lot of time in Muslim lands, I do find the contrast between this ending in Scripture very interesting when compared with the Quran. In Scripture, God's ushering in of the new age where everything is set right and it's new. There's a new heaven and a new earth. This new age is spoken of by what will not be there. Tears will be wiped away. They're gone. There's no more death, pain, sorrow, suffering. They're gone. And so this new age is pictured by what won't be there. In the Quran, it speaks of what will be there. The Quran says in the new age, there's going to be jeweled couches. There's going to be the purest, most amazing wine. There's going to be all the fruit you can desire. And for the Muslims, there's going to be these virgins to attend to you. And there's going to be all these things there. And so it speaks of what's there. And what's interesting is that John, he doesn't tell us the new age is just more quantity of what we can have now. He doesn't say the new age is just where you can increase your experience of what's already here. Comfort, food, sex. This is what the Quran would say, that there's more of that. John doesn't say there's more of what we can already get. Instead, it's something so entirely new. He doesn't describe what's there. He simply describes what's not there. It's not a place of death, pain, and sorrow. As we turn to communion, we can think like Jesus. Scripture says that he went through his death, his suffering, and the cross. He went through it because his eyes were set on the future. Jesus went through this because he saw what was ahead of him. He didn't see what was in the present moment. And like we looked at last week, Jesus looked to a different age, a new age. Hebrews says he saw the joy ahead. So he went through all this that we've looked at in his life. He endured to then go ahead of us and prepare things for us. Hebrews then gives us our call to set our eyes on Jesus, who's ahead of us. And we go all through all the negative in our life in the same manner Jesus did, with our eyes set ahead. So that's how Jesus made it. And that's how we as Christians talk about the hope that we have. What's ahead, what the future holds. We're here, we're being shaped, but we know what's ahead. We've been getting the habit of being introspective for a moment before we take communion. So today I'd like to take a few minutes. Would you consider internally setting your eyes towards God? Setting your eyes towards Jesus, who's gone ahead of you. Just as Jesus made it through by having his eyes set forward, let's set our eyes forward today.